Life is about making connections. And my role as the rabbi of a community, one of, if not my greatest responsibility, is connecting with my congregants and helping facilitate their connection with Hashem, with God. And this isn't so different from the role that the Kohanim, the priest, had in the days of the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash, the tabernacle in the wilderness and the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim. And this week's Parasha Emor discusses some of the responsibilities that the Kohanim had towards the people. Begins discussing certain things that were limiting to the Kohanim, certain things, relationships that they couldn't have, certain things they could not do. And one of the first questions that pops up is, why are they so limited? First of all, any human being should be able to connect with Hashem. Just because they're there to facilitate the connection, why are they held to such a high standard? And we're actually going to answer that question by connecting the beginning of the Parsha to something that seems quite unconnected, quite distant, but really is close. So the Parsha begins again with discussing the Kohanim, and then it goes on to talking about the holiday cycle, the Chagim, the Shalosh Regalim, the holidays, the pilgrimages to Yerushalayim. What's the context? What does that have to do with the book of Vayikra, of the Levitical priestly laws? Is when people would go to the temple to offer or to bring offerings, they would be offered by the Kohanim. So it makes perfect sense to include that in there. And one of the holidays that's discussed, relevant to right now, is of course Pesach and Shavuot, and the period in between known as the Omer. So our Parsha this week commands us to bring an Omer offering, the first best part of our grain. And during the harvesting cycle between the end of or the beginning of Pesach, second day of Pesach, and Shavuot, we have to count the days and the weeks. 7 weeks, 49 days. And one question that comes there, very interesting, is why are we counting up? If our goal is to get to the end from Pesach to Shavuot, just like a rocket ship taking off, you want to count down because you're eager to get there. But there's a beautiful commentary from a 20th century Israeli rabbi, Rabbi Shimshon Pincus Zatzal, in a work called Nefesh Shimshon. And what he suggests is that kasher adam sofer et ayamim likrat yom mesuyam, when a person is counting, not just in general, they're counting specific each day, that rather than counting down and saying, gosh, when is this going to be over? Rather, they're counting up and they're valuing each day and saying, I have another day of the Omer where I could harvest and bring special grain to Hashem. And the rabbis also say, and Rabbi Shimshon Pincus also says, that the reason that Hashem wanted us to bring an Omer is to recognize that the farmers of Israel wouldn't have had any good growing crops if not for Hashem's blessing. So every day a person counts the Omer, or at least one of these farmers, you would say, this is the 18th day where I have this God consciousness, this awareness that I wouldn't have any of these crops without a blessing from God. This is the 23rd day. This is the 28th day, which is true of when I'm recording this message. Every day is valuable because it's another mark on the chart of saying, I've had a day of connecting with Hashem. And this time should then be a time of great joy, and in some ways it is, and there are many books about making each day of the Omer an opportunity to connect with Hashem and deeper mystical ideas, part of our tradition. There's so much value in this time, yet, as many of us know, there's also these terrible mourning practices, or mourning practices because of something terrible that happened. What happened, the Talmud tells us, is that Rabbi Akiva, who lived in the time of the Romans in the early centuries of the modern millennia, and he had 24,000 students, and a plague struck and killed thousands and thousands of them. Whether this was achsara, an actual thing like diphtheria, a real plague, or whether it was code for some sort of battle, it doesn't matter. Thousands of the best and brightest students in history were struck down, and it was left to five rabbis who were able to pass on the tradition to today. And there are a lot of questions here, but the first one I want to talk about is why? Why was the punishment so severe for these seemingly innocent young men that they would die in such large numbers? Now, the common answer given to it is because they didn't have derech eretz. They didn't treat each other with respect. So they should deserve death. But if we look at another 20th century rabbi, Rabbi Aaron Kotler, who was from Lithuania and then established a great yeshiva in Lakewood in New Jersey, and he wrote a beautiful work, Mishnat Haron. And in this work, he discusses that these students weren't just regular people walking around the street. They were the ones who were responsible for passing on the oral tradition from Rabbi Akiva and the previous generation to the next one. It wasn't just a matter of rote memorization. They weren't just writing books. They were the people that would decide how it would be portrayed. They were the ones who would interact with the average Israelite, with the average Jew on the street, and teach them the Torah. And it wasn't just that they weren't treating each other nice. If a rabbi comes to me and he has something beautiful to teach me, but the way he teaches me is by yelling at me and telling that I've been wrong all this time and I'm a fool for how I've been doing it, and he's teaching me the right way, it almost doesn't matter that he's right. I would never listen to him. We even have a mitzvah in the Torah, tochacha, where we correct, we rebuke others who are doing something, a mitzvah in an incorrect way, but the rabbis are clear. If the person will listen to you and you can say it with love, say it. But if they won't listen to you, it will only cause them to hate you and our tradition. Don't say anything. So Rav Aaron Kotler is suggesting that these students were not the right vessels. They weren't the right people to pass on our tradition because it would have been tainted. So it's not that just by being a bunch of, putzes, they deserve to die, but our tradition would have been passed down with this shade, this shadow of darkness on it, and that was too grave a sin to allow them to be the teachers of our tradition. But Rav Kotler continues, accepting that while that is a great tragedy, there's another way to look at this. He says, Kadai gam lehitbonen me'idach gisa. It's worthwhile to look at the other side of this. 24,000 human beings who may not have deserved to die did die, yet all it took was five good, honest, righteous people to pass on our entire tradition. And this isn't just about the wisdom and the knowledge of those 5 rabbis. This is also about the kindness, about the compassion and the mercy that went with their teaching. If our tradition is tainted by hatred in the way that it's passed down in the Masorah, it's not worth being passed down. But if it's sent down with love and kindness, then everyone will embrace it. So I said that I wanted to connect this to one of the first questions about why the Kohanim are held to such a high standard. Now, if one wants to look at every single detail about what the Kohanim could and could not do, they might challenge what I'm about to posit and put forward, saying, how does this make them good people? But I don't think that's the point. The Kohanim needed to dedicate their lives only and solely in everything, who they could marry, what they could eat, where they could live, what they could own. They needed to be constantly reminded that their one purpose in life was to facilitate our relationship and our ability to make offerings, korbanot, to become closer to Hashem. And as soon as they started to forget that, then the temple would fall. And there have been times in our history when the Kohanim were corrupt and the temple was destroyed. But when the Kohanim only focused on the people and on Hashem and on righteousness, then they could be the conduits, the representatives, the facilitators for our tradition. So even though not every detail seems to make sense, look at it as a holistic model. The Kohanim needed to live a unique, separate life apart, so they could always remember their role in connecting people to Hashem. I need to remind myself of that every day as a rabbi. When I see something and I say, as a teacher, I'd love to point this out. But if it's not going to bring someone lovingly closer to our tradition, it's not worth saying. And I want to put that challenge to all of us. Everyone who's listening here has seen something that aggravates, frustrates them, that they want to point out, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. But think about, A, are you sure about that? B, can you say it in a way which is loving and compassionate? And B, will the person accept it? Because if those 3 things are not true, you might be misleading the person, you might hurt the person, and certainly they won't learn anything and they might be pushed away. So our role in making connections is to bring people closer together. Every day of the Omer is an opportunity to say, here's another day where I thought about Hashem and did a mitzvah. Every day of our lives where we teach something is a way to think, I brought someone closer to Hashem. So think for yourselves, how do you make connections and bring people closer? Shabbat Shalom.